I rise on behalf of the Labour Party. As earlier speakers have said, we are supporting this bill which establishes a Productivity Commission to Select Committee. Before dealing with some of the issues that arise, can I just respond to one of the comments that was made by the prior speaker, who asserted to this House that one of the things that went wrong in the last decade was an increase in borrowing. An increase in borrowing. What a short memory that person has. And if that is the sort of the level of intellect that's going into the establishment of the detail of the Productivity Commission, well, it really doesn't portend well for its future. The reality is that the last government reduced government debt from 38% of GDP to 17% of GDP gross, and that net debt, once we took into account savings through the likes of the Cullen Fund, was virtually zero. And of course that is the standout difference between the economic performance of New Zealand and countries like Japan, United States, Great Britain, Greece, Portugal, Spain. All of those countries have got high government debt and as a consequence have got very little room to move in terms of what the government can do compared with New Zealand. That is the position that this national government inherited, is low debt, not high debt. So, Ms Goodhue, that is just wrong when you made that assertion. Parliament agrees, I think, on just about all sides here that we need to improve our productivity of output in New Zealand so as to improve the well-being of New Zealanders, to fund the sort of services that we think governments should fund in terms of education and health, superannuation and the like. If I have a concern about the way in which this Productivity Commission may turn, I have a concern that it's going to be focused unduly on deregulation. We heard from the Minister, Bill English, primarily talk about deregulation. I heard Rodney Hyde's comments and said that initially this is going to start with it's going to begin modestly, were his words, and I think that might be code for an undue focus on deregulation, because if this Productivity Commission is going to work, it's got to have a function that goes beyond deregulation. And I really urge the government to have a broader focus. I think it's absolutely clear that the government needs some help in terms of building productivity, because they've certainly made some bloomers so far. They've certainly made some terrible mistakes. Well, you know, we hear criticisms again from David Bennett saying, oh, no, that's not so. Well, David Bennett, do you really think that the Australian Productivity Commission would have stood there and said that, oh, that's good of you, National Party, to reduce savings in New Zealand, to cut KiwiSaver, at the very time that the Australian government has been increasing savings in Australia? Currently 9% of gross salary or wages is saved in compulsory savings in Australia, going up to 12%. This is a country that the government is saying has got an effective productivity commission. That move's certainly not criticised by the Australian Productivity Commission. And what did the national government do here? They cut KiwiSaver contributions. What did they do in terms of public sector savings? They stopped contributions to what is colloquially called, used to be called the Cullen Fund. He now says it should be called the English Fund because it's getting so small in terms of contributions. So in terms of savings, they have made some wrong moves. And let's hope that if they got some advice from a Productivity Commission, that they would do better on that front. If we look at where else they're going wrong, well, you know, they really are focusing on an extractive economy. The national government is focused on extractive industries, be it agricultural industries that extract value from the land, or the mineral extraction industry. Now, both of those industries are very important to New Zealand, and I'm not decrying their importance, but New Zealand will not approach the wealth of Australia or other more successful developed nations on the back of farming or extractive industries. And indeed, it pains me to reflect on the fact that the first 18 months of this government's economic agenda has been so much focused on increasing mining and national parks and the like. It was going to, according to the Prime Minister in the statement to Parliament at the start of this year, be an important part of the economic step change for this country, the economic step change for this country, and it's absolutely plain that the Minister of Economic Development, Jerry Brownlee, saw it as his cornerstone policy. Just this week, we've seen that ambition dissolve. They've resiled completely from mining and national parks, which is a good decision because it was never going to make this major step change that was needed and was inappropriate in any event. Those national parks should not be mined, but it does show that the government does not have any plan as to how it's going to increase New Zealand's productivity in a way that bridges the gap between New Zealand and Australia. And I want to come back to that because we heard from Rodney Hyde make reference to that as well in his speech. The problem is, other than the mantra that we had at the time of the election that the national government was going to bridge the gap with Australia by 2025, we've had no deliverables, and we haven't had any articulation or specificity as to how we're going to measure progress towards that goal. And in fact, Jerry Brownlee went so far as to both say in Parliament this week that it's no longer a goal, it's an aspiration. It's just an aspiration. And we had him at Select Committee recently saying that they had no subset by which they could be held accountable as to whether they were achieving that goal. Now, we all know that by 2025, Jerry Brownlee's not going to be here. Bill English isn't going to be here.
No plan.
I have no plan to be here. I don't think many of us plan to be here by 2025, but the government, some of us do. Well, we have John Carter from Northland saying that he's going to be there. Well, what a sad life you have, Mr. Carter, if you plan to be here by 2025. Sad for you, sadder still for the country, but the reality is that the government has no subset of this 2025 goal by which they can be held accountable. And so, we've got nothing to judge them against their rhetoric. Now, maybe this Productivity Commission, if well designed, will actually provide a bit of input into the government, which at last gives them some direction, because they've certainly got none of their own. Mr. Speaker, I've talked about some of the mistakes that have been made on savings and over-reliance on extractive industry. It's clear that we actually have to build productivity in our other export industries. And again, I would contrast what Australia's done under their Productivity Commission, that this is said to be modelled upon, compared with what the government's already done. Well, Australia, they've got an R&D tax credit. They've long had an R&D tax credit. In addition to savings to encourage depth of capital markets and therefore more money being available to businesses to borrow and spend on increasingly productive plant and equipment that they can do more of because they've got good savings. In addition to that, they encourage the businesses to take advantage of those savings and the availability of capital through an R&D tax credit. Well, what did the current government in New Zealand, the national government, do after they took office? They did the opposite of what the Australians do to improve R&D expenditure, to improve the sort of expenditure to increase the sort of expenditure that improves productivity over time. They actually went in the opposite direction, and they removed the R&D tax credit that was legislated by us, pretending that instead you're better just to have tax cuts weighted to those who are already the more wealthy people in society as a substitute. Well, if that was the answer, why is that not the answer in Australia, that has patently performed better recently than New Zealand economically? So they abolished the R&D tax credit. They've actually replaced it with something in the latest budget, which is a sort of a voucher-based system which goes some of the way but not nearly far enough. The other thing they've done, and this, I'm pointing out all of these things because it seems to me that the rhetoric of the government about wanting to improve productivity goes in the face of common sense in a lot of the other areas. In the latest budget, they cut depreciation allowances for investments in short-lived assets. Now, short-lived assets are things like computers and things that we need to have for increasingly sophisticated both service industries but also productive industries. And they reduced the rate of depreciation that a business can claim in respect to those short-lived assets. And again, that seems to me to be exactly the opposite direction to that which Australia goes to pursuant to their Productivity Commission. So if I have a suspicion here, we are embarking upon this journey, voting for this at first reading, and we do want to see something that's put in place here that is enduring if it can be agreed. But if I have a suspicion...
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member, but his time has expired.